Billionaire CEO dined with his fiancée and parents, until the black waitress whispered, "Run now." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a warm evening in San Francisco. The kind of evening where the lights of the city glistened like diamonds, and the sounds of laughter filled the air. At one of the most exclusive restaurants in town, a luxury establishment that catered to the city's elite, a billionaire CEO named Richard Langston sat down to a lavish dinner with his fiancée, Olivia, and his parents. The table was a perfect picture of high society. Crystal wine glasses, fresh lobster, golden silverware gleaming in the soft lighting, and delicate jazz music drifting through the air. Richard, a man in his mid-50s with sharp features and an air of indifference, looked like the embodiment of success. Olivia, his beautiful fiancée, sat beside him, her smile radiating in the dim candlelight. His parents, elegant and reserved, observed the conversation, occasionally nodding or offering their own remarks. The mood was perfect, or so it seemed. But not far from this picture of perfection, hidden from the glamorous gaze of the room, was a woman named Naomi Brooks, a black waitress. Naomi had worked at the restaurant for 3 years, serving drinks, clearing plates, and always moving with a quiet grace. She had seen countless wealthy patrons in this place, men and women who carried themselves as if they owned the world. She had learned not to make waves, not to draw attention, and most certainly, not to cross paths with the powerful figures who dined here regularly. But tonight, something felt different. Naomi couldn't explain it, but her instincts were screaming at her. As she approached the table, her tray held glasses of the finest wine, and she moved with the precision of someone who had mastered the art of staying unnoticed. Richard's voice broke through the hum of the room, his words sharp as he addressed the waiter who had just brought his food. "I'm not sure what you're doing here." Richard's voice was smooth, but there was something underneath it, something Naomi couldn't quite place. She felt the sting of his words. Her chest tightened as she felt the subtle weight of their superiority in the air. She glanced over to Olivia, who appeared distracted, flipping through her phone. Richard glanced at Naomi, not even bothering to look her in the eye. "Why are you here? Don't you have someone else who could serve this table?" he asked dismissively. Naomi paused for a moment, but her training kicked in. She forced a polite smile and proceeded with her service. She had learned to ignore the insults and keep going. But tonight, as the conversation continued, she could sense something wasn't right. She overheard Richard's conversation with his father about a potential business deal, a deal worth millions. And she could sense his frustration, his impatience, his arrogance growing with every passing minute. As she filled another wine glass, Naomi's instincts told her to be ready. Something was coming. Something big. The air felt thick, and Naomi's heart raced. She was about to witness a moment that would change everything. As Naomi quietly moved between tables, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The tension in the air was palpable, and it seemed to grow thicker with every passing moment. She glanced back toward the Langston family's table, where Richard, still the picture of arrogance, was laughing loudly at a joke Olivia's father had made. Naomi couldn't help but notice the way people were looking at her. They weren't looking at her with the usual dismissive glance she had grown so used to. No, these were looks of curiosity, some even with traces of judgment. It was almost as if the entire room had become aware of her presence, and that feeling of being invisible was slipping away. As she refilled glasses, Naomi's mind raced. She had overheard snippets of the conversation earlier. Richard had been talking about a deal with a company, something big. The mention of millions of dollars, the edge in his voice when he spoke about it. It all felt important, like the stakes were higher than anyone realized. Naomi's thoughts were interrupted when Richard's voice cut through the room again. "This meal is beneath us," he said, his tone laced with disdain. "Why are we wasting our time with this overpriced restaurant when we could be sealing this deal in the comfort of my office?" His words stung, and she could see Olivia trying to laugh it off, but the unease was settling deeper into the atmosphere. Naomi's hands gripped the wine bottle a little too tightly. She tried to shake it off, but the weight of the situation kept creeping up on her. Richard and his parents had no idea how lucky they were to be here. Their privilege was so thick, Naomi could almost taste it in the air. As she moved to leave their table, something caught her eye. A subtle movement, almost imperceptible. A figure at the back of the restaurant. A shadow lurking in the corner. Naomi couldn't make out the details, but the man's presence felt out of place. He didn't belong here. Naomi's heart began to race. Instinctively, she turned her attention back to Richard's table. Just as Richard leaned in to say something to his father, Naomi noticed it. The man in the back was approaching the Langston family's table. He was walking with purpose, his expression cold and calculating. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Naomi had been trained to notice things. It was part of her job. But this was different. This wasn't just a typical restaurant encounter. This felt dangerous. Her mind flashed back to the years she had spent working 2 jobs to support herself and her family. Every shift, every moment spent in a crowded restaurant. She had learned to read people, to spot the subtle cues, the unspoken tensions. And now, something told her that this wasn't just an ordinary night. Richard's careless arrogance, the mysterious figure creeping closer, the way the air felt too thick to breathe, everything was building to something. Naomi's instincts screamed at her. She knew she couldn't ignore this. She couldn't stay quiet and pretend everything was fine. Richard Langston had no idea what was coming for him. Naomi took a deep breath and steeled herself. She couldn't let her emotions cloud her judgment, but she could feel the weight of the moment. It was up to her now. She had to do something. As she moved back toward the table, her eyes never leaving the man in the back, Naomi made a split-second decision. She walked straight up to the Langstons' table. Her heart pounded in her chest as she leaned in just enough to speak directly into Richard's ear. "Run now," she whispered, her voice calm but urgent. For a split second, everything froze. The room seemed to go silent, as if the world had paused just for that moment. Richard's eyes widened in confusion, and Olivia looked at Naomi, baffled. But Naomi didn't wait for an answer. She stepped back, her movements smooth, and in that moment, she knew something had shifted. Richard's gaze followed her for a brief moment, his expression unreadable. And then, just like that, Naomi turned away. The man in the back of the restaurant had stopped moving. His eyes locked onto Naomi for a fleeting moment before he slowly turned and disappeared back into the shadows. Naomi didn't know what had just happened, but she knew one thing for sure. She had just put Richard Langston and his family on a path they weren't ready for. Naomi's heart raced as she stepped away from the Langston family's table, her every movement feeling like it was being watched. She could feel Richard's confused gaze burning into her back, but she didn't turn around. Her mind was focused on something much bigger than a single dinner shift. The man in the back of the room had disappeared, but Naomi's instincts told her this wasn't over. Her decision to act was more than just a hunch. It was a call to action that could change everything. As she reached the kitchen, she found herself shaking slightly, her mind spinning. She wasn't supposed to get involved. She wasn't supposed to step out of her role as a waitress. But the moment she heard that whisper of danger, it became impossible to ignore. Naomi had lived her life understanding that being invisible was her best protection. The less people saw her, the fewer problems she would face. But tonight, she wasn't going to stay hidden. She wasn't going to let them dismiss her. She wasn't going to be just another face behind a tray. The kitchen was quiet, and Naomi took a few moments to steady her breathing. She glanced out the back door of the restaurant, watching as the rain continued to pour down. Her mind kept returning to Richard and his family, still oblivious to the danger that was inching closer with every passing second. But Naomi wasn't about to let that happen. She didn't have much time. There was something about the way Richard carried himself that told Naomi he wouldn't back down easily. He wouldn't flee without a reason, and he certainly wouldn't take advice from someone like her without questioning it. Naomi wasn't sure if he would follow her warning, but she was determined to make sure they were ready. Taking a deep breath, she walked back toward the dining area, her eyes scanning the room. Richard and Olivia were now standing near the window, their backs turned, deep in conversation. The room had gone back to its usual hum, with clinking glasses and quiet murmurs of conversation, but Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that the calm was only temporary. She approached the table slowly, each step deliberate, and paused when she saw the shadow move again. This time, the man from the back of the restaurant was closer. He was standing by the door, his eyes scanning the crowd. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know if he had been following Richard or if he had just been waiting for the right moment. But she knew one thing. It was time to act. She reached for the phone in her pocket and quickly texted the manager, alerting him to the situation. She didn't wait for a response. She couldn't afford to. Naomi took one last look at Richard and Olivia, still unaware of what was happening. Without another thought, she stepped out from behind the bar and into the main dining area. She moved toward Richard's table, her voice low but steady as she leaned in to speak to him again. "You need to leave, now," she said, her words clear and direct. Richard turned to her. This time his expression one of annoyance mixed with confusion. "What do you mean, leave?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I'm not going anywhere." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly as she held his gaze. "There's someone in here who shouldn't be," she replied, her tone unwavering. She didn't have time to explain, and she knew Richard wouldn't listen to her if she tried. But Naomi had no intention of letting him or his family stay in danger. "This is not a joke, Mr. Langston," she said. "Trust me, you don't want to stay any longer." Richard's eyes flickered with irritation, but Naomi could see a flicker of hesitation in his expression. The tension in the room was palpable now. Olivia had turned around, and the rest of the diners were starting to look up from their conversations, sensing something was off. Naomi took a step back and glanced at the manager, who was already moving to call security. As Richard and Olivia stood there, still uncertain, Naomi could only hope that the warning she had given them would be enough. She had done all she could, but it was up to them now to decide whether to listen. Just then, Naomi caught the faintest movement in her peripheral vision. The man who had been lurking by the door was now moving toward the Langston family. Naomi's stomach twisted with anxiety. She needed to act quickly. Without thinking, she rushed toward Richard, pushing past a few startled guests as she made her way to the table. Richard's expression changed in an instant as he turned to face Naomi. "What is it now?" he demanded, his voice growing louder. "We're not going anywhere, lady." Naomi ignored him and grabbed Olivia's arm. "Get up," she said urgently. "Now." Olivia's eyes widened in confusion, but she didn't resist. Naomi could see the panic setting in as the realization began to hit. Naomi pulled her toward the exit. Richard stood frozen for a moment before he followed, a look of bewilderment on his face. The man in the back of the restaurant was almost upon them now, moving with intent, and Naomi knew that time had run out. "Come on," Naomi urged, almost pulling Olivia out the door as the staff began to realize what was happening. Richard hesitated, looking back over his shoulder, but Naomi didn't wait for him to make up his mind. She was already leading Olivia toward the safety of the back alley. What happened next would change everything. Naomi's heart was racing as she pulled Olivia through the back door of the restaurant, out into the alley. The sound of the storm outside drowned out the frantic chatter and clinking glasses of the restaurant behind them. The cold rain lashed against her face, but Naomi barely noticed. Every instinct was screaming that they needed to get as far away as possible. She could feel Olivia's arm trembling in her grip, her confusion palpable. "What is going on?" Olivia asked, her voice strained. Naomi didn't have the luxury of explaining everything right now. "Just keep moving," Naomi said, her voice calm but urgent. "We need to get to safety." As they rounded the corner of the building, Naomi's mind was spinning. She could still see Richard standing by the door, looking back at them with confusion etched on his face. He didn't get it yet. He didn't understand the danger that was closing in. Naomi glanced over her shoulder, scanning the alley for any sign of the man who had been lurking in the restaurant. Her eyes darted to every shadow, every corner, her pulse quickening. She didn't know who he was or what his intentions were, but something about the way he had moved through the room told her he was no stranger to danger. As they reached the far side of the alley, Naomi slowed down, her hand still clutching Olivia's. The rain was coming down harder now, and she could barely hear over the pounding storm. Olivia's breath was shallow, her face pale as she looked around in disbelief. "Naomi, what's happening?" Olivia repeated, but this time there was a tremor in her voice. Naomi turned to face her, her eyes narrowing. "I don't know," she said quietly. "But whatever it is, it's not safe for you to be anywhere near here. We have to get you out of here, away from Richard." Olivia's eyes flickered with confusion, her brow furrowing. What are you talking about? Richard's a billionaire CEO. He's untouchable. What danger could he possibly be in? Naomi hesitated for a moment. She wanted to tell her everything. The danger she had sensed, the way Richard had been so dismissive, the stranger lurking in the restaurant. But she didn't have time. She couldn't explain it all, not in the middle of a storm and not when the clock was ticking. Trust me, Naomi said firmly. We need to move now. But before Naomi could take another step, a voice rang out from the darkness behind them. You should have stayed inside. Naomi whipped around, her heart leaping into her throat. There, emerging from the shadows of the alley, was the man she had seen in the restaurant. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes locked on Naomi and Olivia. The cold rain reflected off his dark jacket as he moved toward them with deliberate steps. Naomi instinctively took a step back, pulling Olivia behind her. Stay back, Naomi said, her voice steady despite the surge of fear she felt. She couldn't help but notice the glint of something metallic in his hand, a knife, sharp and dangerous. Olivia gasped, her face going white as she clutched Naomi's arm. Naomi had faced danger before, but this felt different. She wasn't just trying to protect herself. She was protecting someone else, someone who didn't even understand the depth of the threat they were facing. Who are you? Naomi demanded, trying to keep her voice calm. What do you want? The man's smile was cold, almost predatory. I want what's mine, he said, his voice low and threatening. Naomi's mind raced. Who was this man? What did he mean by what's mine? Before she could respond, he moved closer, the knife glinting in his hand. Olivia stepped closer to Naomi, her voice trembling. Please, she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. What do we do? Naomi, what do we do? Naomi's heart beat faster. She needed to think, needed to act fast. She couldn't let him get any closer. Her mind flashed back to her training, to the countless hours spent in the restaurant observing people, learning their behavior. She knew how to handle difficult situations, but this was something different. The man took another step forward, the knife raised slightly. I don't want to hurt you, he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. But I will if I have to. Naomi's breath hitched as she took a step forward, putting herself between Olivia and the man. You don't have to do this, Naomi said, her voice steady now. You don't want to hurt anyone. You just want something that isn't yours. The man laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that echoed off the alley walls. What I want doesn't concern you. It's about survival. It's about what's always been taken from me. Naomi's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. The alley was narrow, the storm still howling around them. There was no easy escape. But Naomi wasn't one to give up without a fight. She kept her eyes on the man, watching his every movement. You can walk away, she said, her voice firm. You can leave, and we'll forget this ever happened. The man stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. For a moment, Naomi thought he might actually listen. But then, he took a step back, his gaze flicking to Olivia before returning to Naomi. I don't think you understand, he said, his tone changing. You're in my way. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She had to think fast. Without warning, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, dialing the emergency number. It was a risk, but she had no choice. As she spoke into the phone, her voice was calm but urgent. I need help. We're in danger. We're at the back of Waitress Lounge in the alley. There's a man with a knife. The man's eyes widened in recognition as he took a step forward, but it was too late. Naomi had already made the call. The seconds ticked by in a blur. Naomi kept her eyes on him, waiting for the moment when everything would shift. The man hesitated, looking over his shoulder. That was when Naomi saw it. His hesitation, the small crack in his confidence. She knew it was her moment. Naomi quickly moved to block Olivia, pushing her behind her as she prepared for the worst. The man's eyes flicked to her again, this time filled with fear. He turned and ran down the alley, disappearing into the stormy night. Naomi stood there, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her heart still racing. It was over. For now. The rain was still falling hard, drenching Naomi and Olivia as they huddled together in the alley. The moment the man with the knife disappeared into the night, Naomi felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was short-lived. She glanced at Olivia, who was trembling beside her, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. Naomi couldn't blame her. She had just been thrust into a situation no one should ever have to face. Naomi's mind raced, trying to process everything that had just happened. The storm, the man, the knife, and most of all, Richard Langston's family. They had no idea how close they had come to disaster. Naomi could still hear the man's voice echoing in her mind. He wanted something that wasn't his. And Naomi had no idea what that something was, but she was certain it had something to do with Richard. She took a deep breath and turned to Olivia. "Are you okay?" Naomi asked, her voice gentle, but firm. Olivia nodded slowly, her eyes still wide with disbelief. "I think so. I don't even know what just happened. This is insane." Naomi understood. It wasn't easy to make sense of what they had just gone through. "We need to get to safety," Naomi said, her voice calm despite the chaos inside her. Olivia nodded again, her hands still shaking. Naomi took her arm gently, leading her back into the shadows of the alley. The storm was still raging, but Naomi didn't care. The danger wasn't over, and she wasn't about to let Olivia walk back into it. As they reached the corner of the alley, Naomi could see the flashing lights of police cars in the distance. The call she had made to emergency services was working. Help was on the way, but Naomi knew she couldn't stay in the alley forever. She needed to get Olivia out of here, away from the storm, away from the danger. They needed answers, and they needed to get to a safe place. Naomi's thoughts turned to Richard. He had no idea what had just happened, no idea that his arrogance and indifference had almost cost him everything. Naomi didn't want to think about the man with the knife anymore. She didn't want to think about the mystery surrounding Richard and his family. She wanted to make sure Olivia was safe. They started walking, carefully avoiding the main street, staying in the shadows of the tall buildings that lined the alley. Naomi glanced over at Olivia, who was still quiet, her face pale. "You're safe now," Naomi said softly. "No one's going to hurt you." Olivia gave a small, shaky smile. "I don't know how you knew what to do back there. I don't know how you stayed so calm." Naomi shrugged. "It's part of the job. You get used to it." She didn't tell Olivia the truth. She hadn't always been this calm. She had been in her fair share of dangerous situations, but nothing had prepared her for this. Not for the man with the knife, not for the storm, not for the feeling of danger that had been building up all night. But she wasn't going to let Olivia see that. She had to be strong. She had to keep them both safe. As they reached a quieter part of town, the lights of the police cars grew brighter. Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from the manager at Waitress Lounge. "Are you okay? We saw what happened. The police are on their way." Naomi sighed with relief. At least the restaurant staff had seen everything and were taking action. But she wasn't ready to relax just yet. She needed to know what had happened to Richard. She needed to know if he had followed her advice and left. "We need to find somewhere to hide," Naomi said, pulling Olivia gently toward a nearby alley. Olivia nodded, but her voice was still shaky. "I just don't understand. Why would someone want to hurt Richard? He's a billionaire. He's untouchable." Naomi shook her head. "It's not about him being a billionaire. It's about what he's involved in. And trust me, Olivia, he's not untouchable. No one is." They stepped into the alley, finding a spot where they could hide and wait. Naomi could still feel the weight of the night's events pressing on her chest. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew she had to stay alert. "Stay close," Naomi said to Olivia. "I'll keep you safe." As they huddled together, Naomi's thoughts kept returning to Richard. She had warned him. She had done everything she could to keep him safe. But would he listen? Would he realize just how close he had come to losing everything? The flashing lights of the police cars drew closer, but Naomi knew this was just the beginning. The real danger was yet to come. Naomi stood in the alley, the sound of distant sirens growing louder as the rain continued to pour. The chill from the storm seeped into her bones, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing, each thought a blur of what had happened and what was still to come. Olivia was still beside her, huddled close, her face a mix of fear and confusion. Naomi glanced over at her, seeing the younger woman's anxiety reflected in her eyes. She reached out and placed a reassuring hand on Olivia's arm. "You're safe now," Naomi said softly, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We just need to stay here for a while. The police will be here soon, and we'll figure this out." Olivia nodded, though her expression was still troubled. "But why would someone come after Richard like that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "He's a billionaire. He's untouchable." Naomi shook her head slowly. "No one is untouchable. Not really. Power can make people feel invincible, but it also makes them enemies. And when you're that high up, there's always someone ready to take you down. Olivia looked at Naomi, her brow furrowing as she processed the words. But Richard, he's a good man, isn't he? She asked, her voice uncertain. Naomi's eyes hardened slightly. It's not about being a good person, she said. It's about what you're involved in, what you've done to get there. Richard's been playing the game, but that game doesn't come without a price. The two women fell silent for a moment, the only sound the rain tapping against the pavement. Naomi's mind wandered back to the moment in the restaurant when she had whispered for Richard to run. She had done everything she could to protect them, but would they listen? Would Richard realize how close he had come to losing everything? She could feel the weight of the night's events pressing down on her. The storm was raging outside, but there was a storm inside her as well. This wasn't just about protecting Olivia or Richard. It was about something bigger. She had never wanted to be part of someone else's battle, but tonight, Naomi knew she had crossed a line. She was no longer just a waitress. She was part of a story much bigger than herself. A story that could change everything. I think we should leave, Naomi said after a long pause, her voice firm. The police will take care of things here, but we need to be somewhere safe. I don't want to take any more chances. Olivia hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Where will we go? She asked, her voice quiet. Naomi looked around, her gaze settling on the street ahead. I have a place, she said. It's not far. We'll figure it out there. They started walking, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. Naomi's mind was still racing, the feeling of urgency never quite leaving her. She had to know what happened to Richard. She had to know if he had gotten away in time. The sound of sirens grew louder as they made their way to Naomi's small apartment. It was a modest place, tucked away from the chaos of the city. As they entered, Naomi locked the door behind them, feeling the tension in her body begin to ease. Olivia collapsed onto the couch, her body exhausted from the events of the night. Naomi poured them both a glass of water and sat down across from her. The room was silent except for the sound of the rain against the window. Naomi's thoughts drifted back to Richard. She hadn't expected him to leave the restaurant when she told him to. She had expected him to fight back, to challenge her warning. But he hadn't. He had looked confused, yes, but there was something in his expression that made her think he had understood. He hadn't fought it. He had left. Naomi could only hope that he had done so in time, that he had taken her warning seriously. She hadn't seen the man with the knife again, but she knew it wasn't over. It wouldn't be until they got to the bottom of this. I think we should call the police, Olivia said, breaking the silence. Let them know what happened. Naomi shook her head slowly. No, she said quietly. Not yet. We don't know enough. We don't know who was behind it, and we don't know what they want. Olivia looked at Naomi, her eyes wide with confusion. But Naomi, you're the one who saw the man with the knife. You're the one who warned Richard. The police need to know. Naomi nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. They will, eventually. But right now, we need to be smart about this. We don't know what kind of people we're dealing with. We don't know who's on Richard's side, or who's trying to take him down. Until we figure that out, we stay low. The weight of the situation settled over them again. Naomi felt the fatigue creeping in, but she knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She couldn't relax yet. Not until she knew that Richard and his family were safe. And not until she knew who was behind the threat that had almost destroyed everything. As the storm raged outside, Naomi sat back, taking a deep breath. This was only the beginning. The silence in Naomi's apartment felt oppressive, as if the weight of everything that had happened was pressing down on her shoulders. Olivia sat across from her, staring at her hands, still in shock from the night's events. Naomi's mind was running a mile a minute, but her body felt heavy, exhausted. She had just saved them, yet there was still so much left to do. The storm outside continued its furious assault on the city, but the storm Naomi was facing was one that wouldn't be calmed by rain. The man with the knife, the warning to Richard, the strange figure who had disappeared into the shadows. It all pointed to something much bigger, something Naomi wasn't fully prepared for. She knew she had to act fast. The last thing she wanted was to become a target herself, or worse, drag Olivia into a mess that she couldn't escape. Naomi's thoughts kept returning to Richard. She couldn't help but feel a surge of anger at his arrogance, the way he had treated her in the restaurant. If only he had listened to her sooner. If only he had taken the warning seriously. But there was no time to dwell on that. What mattered now was getting out of this alive. Naomi turned to Olivia, who still seemed lost in her own thoughts. You okay? Naomi asked, her voice low. Olivia's eyes slowly met hers, and Naomi could see the confusion and fear still lingering there. I think so, Olivia whispered. But what happens now? Are we just supposed to stay here? Naomi shook her head. No, we can't just sit here and wait. We need to find out what's going on. We need to know who is behind this and why. Olivia looked at her, her eyes wide with disbelief. But Richard is involved in this, right? I mean, he's a billionaire. He has connections. He'll figure this out. Naomi sighed. It's not that simple, Olivia. Being rich doesn't always protect you. If anything, it makes you more of a target. She stood up and began pacing around the small apartment, her mind racing. I'm going to make some calls, figure out who's behind this. I need to know if Richard is safe, if his family is safe. We can't just wait around and hope everything resolves itself. Olivia's voice cracked slightly. But Naomi, what if the man comes back? What if he knows we saw him? Naomi stopped pacing and turned to her, her eyes softening. I'll make sure we're safe, she said, her voice steady but full of determination. You're not alone in this. We'll get through it together. Olivia nodded, though Naomi could still see the fear in her eyes. Naomi grabbed her phone from the counter and dialed the number she had been avoiding all night. The phone rang twice before it was answered. Hello, a familiar voice said on the other end. Naomi felt a knot form in her stomach. It's Naomi, she said, her voice tight. I need to know what's going on. Richard and his family are in danger, and I need to know if he's safe. The voice on the other end paused, and Naomi could almost hear the wheels turning. I'll check on him, the voice said after a moment. But you need to be careful. Whoever's behind this, they're not messing around. Naomi's grip on the phone tightened. I know. That's why I need answers. Fast. She hung up without another word, the silence in the room growing even heavier. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. What had started as a simple warning to Richard had now spiraled into something much darker, and Naomi had no idea where it would end. Olivia was still sitting on the couch, her eyes searching Naomi's face for answers. What did they say? She asked, her voice shaky. Naomi looked at her, her expression hardening. They're checking on Richard. But this isn't over. Whoever this is, they're dangerous. And we need to be ready for whatever comes next. As Naomi turned to look out the window, the rain continued to beat against the glass, a constant reminder that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was brewing inside. Naomi knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. She needed to act, and she needed to act fast. The quiet moment was broken by a sudden knock at the door. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She moved toward it cautiously, glancing at Olivia, whose face was filled with panic. Naomi held up a finger to her lips, signaling Olivia to stay silent. She approached the door slowly, her heart racing in her chest. Another knock, louder this time. Whoever it was, they weren't going away. Naomi's hand reached for the doorknob, her mind racing. Was this the man from the restaurant? Was it someone from Richard's world, looking to finish what had been started? She couldn't afford to be careless. With one final breath, Naomi opened the door, ready for whatever came next. Naomi slowly opened the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her, but she wasn't about to back down. Whoever was on the other side of that door was about to change everything. She pulled the door open just a crack, her eyes quickly scanning the hallway outside. At first, she didn't see anyone. The hall was empty, the lights flickering overhead in the quiet. But then, out of the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It wasn't the man with the knife. It wasn't anyone Naomi had seen before. This man was tall, dressed in a dark coat, his face partially hidden by the brim of a hat. He looked out of place in the quiet, almost deserted street outside, like he didn't belong in this neighborhood. Naomi's instinct screamed at her to slam the door shut, but she stayed still, keeping her composure. The man didn't move any closer. Instead, he just stood there, waiting for her to make the first move. Who are you? Naomi asked, her voice firm. The man didn't answer right away. He simply took a step closer, then stopped. His eyes met hers, sharp and calculating. Naomi could feel the weight of his gaze, like he was measuring her, trying to figure her out. I think you know who I am, he said finally, his voice low and calm. But I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to offer you something. Naomi's mind raced. What could he possibly be offering her? She didn't trust him, not for a second, but there was something in his tone that made her hesitate. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the knot in her stomach. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked over his shoulder, as if checking for someone. Naomi's grip tightened on the door, but she didn't let it close. "I don't have much time," the man said, his eyes flicking back to her. "I'm here because you did the right thing." The man with the knife? He's not just some thug. He's part of something much bigger. Something you're not ready to deal with. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man stepped closer, his tone lowering even more. "I'm here to help you. But you have to listen. There's a war coming, Naomi. A war that no one is prepared for. Richard Langston is in the middle of it, and so are you now." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. Richard, the billionaire CEO who had brushed her off earlier that night. Now, he was the center of this dangerous web, and she was tangled in it. "Why should I trust you?" Naomi asked, her voice hardening. "You've got no reason to help me." The man smiled slightly, a cold, almost sad smile. "Because you don't have a choice," he said. "And neither does Richard. That's why I'm here. I'm giving you a choice. You can walk away from this, forget it ever happened, and let things play out the way they will. Or you can help me stop what's coming." Naomi's mind spun. She was already in too deep, but the idea of backing out didn't sit right with her. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. The man's eyes softened for a moment, just a flicker of something human behind his cold exterior. "I need you to get close to Richard. I need you to watch him. Protect him if you can. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Protect Richard? After everything he had said to her, everything he had done? He had barely acknowledged her, treated her like a servant, and now she was supposed to protect him? It didn't make sense. "I don't even like him," Naomi said, her voice rising. "Why would I help him? After everything he's done?" The man's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, something that made Naomi pause. "Because whether you like him or not, he's part of this. And the only way to stop it is to keep him alive." Naomi swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She didn't know if she could trust him. She didn't know if she could trust anyone in this mess. But she had no choice. Whatever this war was, whatever was coming, it was bigger than her, bigger than Richard. And she knew she couldn't walk away. "Not now. I'll do it," Naomi said, her voice quieter now. "But if anything happens to me, if anything happens to Olivia..." The man held up his hand, cutting her off. "You'll be fine," he said. "But remember, you're in this now. There's no turning back." He paused for a moment, then added, "And one more thing, Naomi. You're not alone in this. There are others watching, waiting, just like you. So don't think you're the only one who can make a difference." Naomi didn't know what to make of that. She didn't know if he was telling the truth, or if this was all part of some game. But she nodded, stepping back from the door. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice firm now. "When the time comes, I'll be ready." The man gave her a brief nod before turning and disappearing into the night. Naomi closed the door behind her, her mind racing. She had just made a deal with the devil. She didn't know if it was the right decision, but she knew she had no other choice. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that was about to break loose. Days passed in a blur of tension and uncertainty. Naomi had tried to keep a low profile, but the weight of her decision was always on her mind. The man in the dark coat had given her a task, a responsibility, and she had no choice but to follow through. She kept a close eye on Richard Langston, watching from the shadows as he continued with his high-powered business deals, oblivious to the danger lurking just beyond his reach. Naomi knew the risks. Every move she made was being watched, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. Olivia stayed close, but Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. Every time Naomi called the man in the dark coat, she was met with vague promises and cryptic advice. "Be patient," he would say. "The time will come." But Naomi couldn't just wait. She wasn't the kind of person who sat idle while chaos unfolded. She had a part to play, and she was going to make sure she played it well. Late one evening, after closing hours, Naomi received a call. It was from the manager at Waitress Lounge. "Naomi, we've got a situation," the manager said, his voice tight with urgency. "Richard's been targeted again. This time it's serious. We need you to come in." Naomi's pulse quickened. She had been expecting something like this, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, hanging up the phone. As she headed out, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment the man in the dark coat had been preparing her for. When she arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere was tense, the staff on edge. Richard was sitting in a back booth, looking unusually pale, his usually sharp demeanor gone. Naomi approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. "What happened?" she asked, her voice steady. Richard looked up, his eyes tired and wary. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I've been getting threats for weeks now. I thought I could handle it, but now, I'm not so sure." Naomi nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The world he had built with power and control was now unraveling, and he was powerless to stop it. "I can help," Naomi said, her voice low but confident. Richard's eyes flickered with skepticism, but he didn't argue. He knew, deep down, that he needed help. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his tone almost defeated. Naomi thought for a moment. "We need to figure out who's behind this. And we need to move quickly. They've been targeting you for a reason, and that reason isn't just about money." Richard nodded, his expression hardening. "I never should have ignored the warning signs. I've made too many enemies." Naomi studied him for a moment. This wasn't the same man who had walked into the restaurant weeks ago, dismissing her with a glance. This man was different, vulnerable. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep you and your family safe," Naomi said. "But we need to move now. We can't wait any longer." Together, they put a plan into motion, reaching out to the right people, connecting the dots, and uncovering a web of deceit and betrayal that stretched further than Naomi could have ever imagined. As the days went by, Naomi watched as Richard finally realized the full extent of the mess he had gotten himself into. It wasn't just business deals or hostile takeovers. It was about power, control, and a battle for survival. But what surprised Naomi the most was how much Richard had changed. The man who had once treated her like a mere servant was now listening to her, trusting her. Naomi had earned that trust, but it wasn't easy. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, they realized that the danger wasn't just from one person. It was a network, a system built on corruption and greed. The man with the knife was just a pawn, a small part of a much larger game. Naomi and Richard had to act fast, and they knew the stakes were higher than ever. With each passing day, the tension grew. The threat was closing in, and Naomi felt the pressure mounting. But she had made a promise, and she was going to keep it. She would protect Richard, even if it meant risking everything. The day of reckoning finally arrived. Richard stood at the center of it all, surrounded by the people who had once feared him, who now saw him as a liability. Naomi stood by his side, a silent protector in the shadows. She wasn't the same person she had been when this all started. She had become more than just a waitress, more than just an observer. She had become a force to be reckoned with. As the confrontation unfolded, Naomi watched as Richard took control, using everything he had learned to outmaneuver his enemies. It wasn't just about wealth or power anymore. It was about survival. And in that moment, Naomi knew that they had won. The storm that had once threatened to destroy them had passed, leaving behind only the wreckage of those who had tried to bring them down. Richard was no longer the man he had been. He had changed, and so had Naomi. They both had learned the hardest lesson of all, that power wasn't just about what you had. It was about what you were willing to protect. And Naomi had protected them all. As they walked away from the wreckage, Naomi glanced at Richard, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. She had done it. She had saved them. She had done more than just survive. She had fought, and she had won.